Hello and welcome to my presentation on Robin Gecht. Robin Gecht was a leader of the Ripper Crew. The other members of the Ripper Crew were Andrew and Thomas Cook-Ross and Edward Spitzer. The Ripper Crew would use a red van in their abductions, and they would just drive around until they found a victim. The only requirement for Gecht was that the victim must have big breasts. Often the victims would be sex workers. Gecht and the rest of the Ripper Crew would torture the victim for hours, awake and aware, with whatever Gecht wanted to use. The women found dead would always have their breast be amputated or damaged in some way. Gecht would do the amputations by typically using piano wire. Unfortunately, Gecht would be charged for only the attack on his last victim. One of the members had taken their confession back due to Gecht being in proximity, and there was no hard evidence that linked him to the murders because the story changes. Attempted murder, rape, deviant sexual assault, aggravated battery, and armed violence. These were his official charges. Gecht's motives are a simple mix of sexual sadism, control, and Satanism. There were talks of Gecht abusing his wife, though these weren't confirmed. What was confirmed were his interaction with sex workers he frequently hired. Gecht would ask sex workers to put needles into their breasts and would even ask them to cut off their own nipples. No sex worker would actually go through with the latter. It isn't a stretch to say that Gecht's wife would do the same things, but even worse, as there was also talk of infected wounds. Thomas Cook-Ross genuinely believed that Gecht had a supernatural power and was afraid about what would happen to him if he refused to cooperate. Spitzer and Andrew Cook-Ross also displayed legitimate fear of Gecht. Even people uninvolved with the murders believed Gecht has supernatural powers like compulsion. Gecht, as stated, always mutilated the breast of his victim and took hours to kill them, always making sure they stayed awake through the entire process. His murders had huge sexual elements to them until the end, were deviated by seeming to lose control from frustration and want the pleasure from the killings. Thomas Cook-Ross would be the one to confess about the satanic details of Gecht's murders. Gecht had an altar in the attic of his house. Supposedly, Gecht had painted 6 black and red crosses on the walls and covered the altar with a red cloth. Gecht would read passages from the Bible, and the members of the Ripper Crew would masturbate over the amputated breasts before Gecht would cut it up, handing the pieces to each member of the Ripper Crew to eat. A search would reveal a rifle involved in a drive-by shooting, a satanic literature, and a trophy box holding over 15 pieces of amputated breast. Gecht's fixation with pain points to sexual sadism, and that the escalation from hiring sex workers to murder a woman was possibly a search for new pleasure. It explained the torture being stretched across hours because he specifically desired to see his victims in pain. Gecht enjoyed the fear and control that he held over the Ripper Crew by getting them to participate in whatever he wanted. Then there is a Satanism, which is what makes the Ripper Crew commonly called a cult. It's unclear if Gecht truly believed in Satan or if it was a tool for controlling the other members. During the abduction and murder of one of the victims, it was noticed that her jewelry wasn't touched, ruling out robbery, and furthermore, to support this, in the case of another victim, roughly $30 worth of cash stuffed into her sock was left untouched. The common mutilation of the breast and body in nearly every victim known or suspected points to Gecht doing this in pursuit of his own pleasure. The first victim to be killed by the Ripper Crew was Linda Sutton, who had disappeared on May 23, 1981, whose body was found on June 1, 1981, in a state of decomposition where a skeletal structure could be seen, maggots crawling, hands cuffed behind her back, and her panties pulled down to her thighs. The official cause of death was likely the several stab wounds to her chest. She was found at a moonlit motel in the field by the hotel manager. According to the coroner report, though, she had only been dead for 3 days. However, Miss Sutton's mutilation did not stop at the stab wounds. Her breast had been cut off. Her body was decomposed so severely because the parasites had no means to make for its entry. More women would be killed. However, they would go unidentified and be found in similar states to Miss Sutton, where the breast amputated or, in one case, badly bitten, and someone had masturbated all over her body. On May 15, 1982, Lorraine Borowski was abducted from outside of her place of work while she was crossing the parking lot. Miss Borowski was repeatedly raped and beaten where one of her breasts had a piano wire wrapped around it and was then amputated. She was killed by being hacked with an axe. She was found in the cemetery known as Clarendon Hills on October 10, 1982. 2 weeks later, there would be another victim abducted on May 29th, late at night. She was named Shuey Mack. Shuey Mack was being driven home by her brother from their family's restaurant in Streamwood. However, after an argument with her brother, she was dropped off onto the side of the road. Shuey Mack was raped by the Ripper Crew and had her breast mutilated, much like the other victims. Her body would be found 4 months later in a construction site at the end of August, covered in lacerations. The first victim to survive would be Angel York, a sex worker who in June 1982 got abducted from the streets into a red van. She was forced to cut off one of her own breasts by Gecht. Gecht slashed her breast and masturbated into the open wound, ejaculating inside, and after doing so, he duct taped Miss York's wound closed before dumping her into the streets. Miss York gave details of her abduction and what she had gone through with the police, now knowing that they were looking for at least 2 men and a red van. In August 1982, Gecht and the others would abduct a teenage sex worker named Sandra Delaware. She would be found dead at the bank of the Chicago River with a bra around her throat and her left breast amputated. Hands bound with shoelaces, she was repeatedly raped and stabbed. Miss Delaware's official cause of death would be the ligature around her neck and the stab wound in her abdomen that penetrated down to her liver. Carol Pappas would be found dead in September 1982, and although the timing of her death matched the Ripper Crew as well as the mutilation, there was not enough evidence to directly link her to Gecht. Cynthia Smith was a victim of the rigor that survived her mutilation in 1982. However, she was not able to provide any hard details on her attacker, so the case went cold. Rose Beck Davis would speak to her husband on September 7th, 1982, and tell him what time that she should be home from her job. She was found in the morning of the next day, dead in a gangway between two buildings, ligatures around her neck and around one of her wrists. Her face was badly swollen from blunt trauma. By Thomas Cocorala's testimony, Gecht had poked her midsection with a knife 3 or 4 times. On her neck, there was a puncture wound and extensive slash wounds across her breast. An internal examination would reveal a 4-inch-long piece of wood in her vaginal area. The only male victims of Gecht was a man named Rafael Torello and a man paralyzed on October 6th, where Gecht did a drive-by shooting far from his usual MO. Beverly Washington, a sex worker, was lured into the red van by Gecht on the same day as the drive-by shooting took place. She was held at gunpoint and forced to strip, hands cuffed before she was forced into oral sex by Gecht, forced to swallow unknown pills, and the last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Gecht, standing over her, holding a cord of wire. Gecht was dumped her by some railroad trucks, one breast amputated and the other nearly so. She was discovered the next day and rushed to the hospital in terrible condition. Her account will be what led to the Ripper crew to be caught. The exact number of victims is unknown to this day, but going at least 18 women. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, once said that he had an accomplice, and coincidentally, Gecht used to work underneath him. The claim of Gacy saying he had an accomplice was never concretely proven, though. Thank you for listening to my presentation.